standards seem boring. They're hard, but like one sentence change can, as I said, like can move billions and billions, if not $1 trillion over many years into different directions. So that's why these battles are happening on kind of one-line changes.
Hello, and welcome to Environment Variables, brought to you by the Green Software Foundation. In each episode, we discuss the latest news and events surrounding green software. On our show, you can expect candid conversations with top experts in their field who have a passion for how to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions of software. I'm your host, Chris Adams. Hello, and welcome to This Week in Green Software, the podcast where we unpack the top stories at the intersection of tech and sustainability. I'm your host, Chris Adams. This time calling from a budget Ibis hotel near La Défense in Paris, between sessions at the Green IO Digital Sustainability Conference. I'm joined by my friend and longtime collaborator, Asim. Asim, lovely to see you again. For people who are new to this, can I give you a bit of space to introduce yourself before I do myself, and then we start looking at the stories?
Yeah, let's do it. So hi, everybody. My name's Asim Hussain. I am the Executive Director of the Green Software Foundation. Excited to be here. So I've been looking at the intersection of software and sustainability for quite a while. Not as long as Chris, but for quite a while. I've been running the foundation, and we're a if you don't know, we are a non-profit consortium of academics, for-profit enterprises, and other non-profits, and we're a standards body, and we believe that through getting people together and agreeing on standards, that's one of the levers that we can use to accelerate the decarbonization and broader sustainability goals of the industry and the world.
Cool, thank you, Asim. If you are new to this podcast, I mentioned my name, Chris. I work at the similarly titled but different organization called the Green Web Foundation. We're a smaller non-profit who are members of the Green Software Foundation, but we were also one of the founding members. And Asim and myself have worked together for quite some time on various other projects, not least OMG Climate, an unconference that took place in 2019 where we met in person, and I realized Asim was about a foot taller than I thought he was, taller than me actually. And Asim, you'll enjoy this actually. Mm-hmm. You know that unconference that had a bunch of people come along that was really enjoyable. Yeah, OMG Climate.
Yeah, I remember
right?
it. Yeah.
I'm at Green IO in Paris, and today there is a non-profit track specifically using almost exactly the same playbook. So there's one specific to get all various groups together for that one, and it's even using the same slide deck. So if you Google medium.com OMG Climate, you'll see a open source slide deck and an open source plan for running an unconference, and that's basically used as one of the bases for that. So
Are you doing I remember the one thing specifically that I'd never experienced before other than OMG, but we all got into a room, and I forgot what we called it. I think it might be 24816 or something, where you had two people had a conversation for 2 minutes on the topic, then it flipped to four people having a conversation on the same topic, but you expanded it out. So it was a really interesting model. I've been thinking about it a lot recently wondering if there's ways of digitizing it. But yeah, that's a really interesting model of getting everybody's a voice there, and then also expanding it out, so giving everybody a chance to kind of present their views. I thought it was really beautiful.
I think you might be talking about the 1, 2, 4, and then all. I think is the thing.
Oh yeah, it might start being one. It might be start with you with yourself with your own thoughts on the topic. Yeah.
You then share with someone else your thoughts, each other, so you get a chance to kind of think about some of this. Then in the group, you share these ideas in a slightly more kind of complete group, so you have a chance to kind of really be influenced by each other's discussions and each other's insights, and then all at the end you share it to the entire group. So hopefully it's gone through a few rounds of refinement and updates, basically. Yes, I think it's called, that was actually a technique from Liberating Structures, which is it's a bunch of agile nerds who run all these events to kind of make it easier for people who are typically kind of introverts and not necessarily natural communicators to find better ways of talking to each other without kind of rage quitting and hitting each other with keyboards and stuff like that, basically. But it turns out to be really useful for exploring new ideas, or at least exploring complicated subjects on conferences and stuff like that. So yeah, Oh God, I didn't actually finish introducing what we do. So where I work actually. So yes, I work at the Green Web Foundation. It's a Dutch non-profit focused on a fossil-free internet by 2030. And I work as a director of policy and technology there, but I also am one of the chairs in the Green Software Foundation's policy working group, which is why I'm somewhat exposed to some of this. Okay, cool. Now that that's out of the way, and we've got the kind of workshop nerdery out of the way as well, Asim, I think we can probably just run through some of the stories, right? Okay, all right. So as per usual, we'll be sharing links to all of these, and if any other stories or notes come out of this, we'll do our best to put them into the show notes. So if something caught your eye, we'll make sure there's a link there that you can continue to look up and act upon if any of this was interesting to you. And with that, Asim, I think we'll look at the first story. The first story, this one, okay, it's the end of the year. At some point we're going to get sick of AI, but this one is an interesting one. This is Hugging Face talking about a refreshment of their AI energy score. So I'll just provide a little bit of an intro, and then I'll give you a chance to respond to that. All right? Okay, so Hugging Face, one of the startups who are a little bit like the GitHub for AI models and machine learning. They have been running a project called AI Energy Score, which is specifically designed to be an open project where people can say for a given task, like say image captioning or text generation or something like that, you can see which models are the most effective in terms of how satisfied people are with the results, but also the energy that they consume. So you can make kind of informed decisions about, should I use a big model here, or do I need this level of accuracy, and can use a model which is maybe a fraction of the energy consumption by comparison, for example. So that's what they have. And they launched it earlier on this year, but this is the relaunch. This is the next set of updates. And there's a bunch of new interesting stuff inside this. And this is now incorporating things like reasoning, which has some actually there's a few really interesting trends from this, actually. I'm going to, Asim, I think we've looked at some of this together. Were there any takeaways or things that caught your eye after you read this that you weren't expecting, or that you thought, oh, that's definitely something we should be paying attention to?
Yeah, I think because it was very. I mean, the reasoning being a lot more energy was expected. I mean, I was just right as you were talking, I was trying to find some of the research that we'd done actually. So Joseph, the head of R&D, had done I don't think we've published it yet.
This is Joseph Cook, the head
Joseph
of R&D
Cook,
at the Green Software Foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, he'd done a just an analysis on kind of like all the existing, like almost a state of the art analysis on the existing papers and disclosures that have happened to try and get a kind of an industry wide opinion on kind of what what are the right coefficients to use when you're trying to do a thing. And I was just looking at his, because he did through, and this is through an analysis of papers, and then for reasoning models it was multiply the base energy by 2.5 to 10x. So that we understood up till this point, and I haven't got double click into which papers exactly mentioned that it was kind of higher. And I was even at times like 10x is like pretty 10x, to say something is 10x the base is already something that captures your attention.
So let me just check when you're saying that, Asim. Just let me. So
Yeah.
you're saying I send a message like generate some text, please, or like tell me a joke, and it might give you a paragraph, like that's what you're saying. But when there's a reasoning, there's like it's thinking to itself might not show you the tokens, but it's really like 10 times what's coming back. That's what you're saying there.
Yeah.
When you have an up. Okay.
I mean, all the reasoning is, I mean, I don't know, that's probably such a understatement, but like reasoning is like it's just asking itself questions before it answers you, and it's kind of seeing what it says. So it starts asking itself questions. Oh, the user seems to be asking a question about this, and it takes the tokens it got out, and then kind of keeps on asking questions. So it's like, yeah, internal monologue. So it's just doing what we all do in our heads. But yeah, I think they're seeing, they've computed numbers 100x more to, like, I think even for DeepSeek, and the most extreme case was like 6,000x more than just like a one shot.
Yeah.
Which
The
is
average
huge.
was 30, but
Yeah.
there are some real outliers which
Yeah.
which are way more, basically,
Yeah.
depending Like I guess some people have more active internal monologues. Sorry, some models have more active internal monologues than others. Basically, that seems to be one of the takeaways that's come from this research that we didn't see before, really.
Yeah. I mean, the truth is also the reasoning models are also better at generally giving you output. I think like that's why they're there. Um, and there's stuff that Jensen Huang has said. Or the stuff that Jensen Huang has said that and I know it's, you've got to take things with a pinch of salt from the CEO of the company
Selling the products that everyone has
that will
to use,
benefit the most from what we're about to say. But he's even talking about or he has talked about reasoning in terms of every token. You take every token that comes out and you put it back in. So at least the reasoning models right now, you ask it a question and it gives you a bunch of tokens and it goes around again. He's even proposing like every single token that goes out, you pump it back in this kind of infinite loop, which will just be way more than this. So yeah, there's a lot that's going on, and I don't really know what to. It's a hard one, isn't it? Because they're better at giving you an answer. So
This
do
is
you want
true.
to? Yeah,
But the nice thing was, I think one of the things that might not be obvious to some people is that some of these models you can have reasoning on, reasoning off, for example. So that gives you some control over some of these decisions you might be making. There was one other takeaway that I was actually surprised by, was that when people looked at the folks at Hugging Face and Salesforce like Sasha Lucioni, Boris Gamazechikov, and now Scott Chamberlain, who's got involved with them, one of the takeaways they found was that the models that they were comparing now compared to the beginning, around about the beginning of the year, they they were basically they were getting slightly more energy consumptive at the same size, not more efficient at the same size. So we might have had this assumption that things are getting more and more efficient over time, right? But some of the data basically shows. I think they said of 15 of the models that were comparable to to like a previous generation, 9 had like equal or greater energy use for the same thing. Now sometimes it's only a little bit more, sometimes it's significantly more. But this gives us an idea that okay, there's a real good reason to actually think about your choice of model you're looking at here, because we can't necessarily assume that models just keep getting more efficient the same way that other technology might be getting more efficient, or the ideas of like Moore's law over the previous 10 years and stuff like
yeah.
that. That was something I wasn't expecting, to be honest.
I think it was also because just thinking through the politics and the geopolitics and logistics and everything that's going through my head. Um, the thing that the AI energy score doesn't measure is I don't know how to really express it, but like the value of the how good the model is, right? So an old model that is very energy efficient but has been superseded because no one uses it anymore because it doesn't give you great answers, would actually score higher on the AI energy score. So I imagine what's going on is that these newer models are actually they're performing better, but that comes at a greater cost.
You raise a good
So I
point,
think that
actually,
yeah,
Asim.
yeah, yeah,
I probably will. I mean, the nice thing is that Boris Gamazotchikov is actually going to be at Green IO, I think today or tomorrow, so I can ask him precisely and say, dude, are they just getting better? Because you're right, that is, I mean, with the AI, with the energy score kind of benchmark, there is this notion of how, scale of what, 1 to 5, for example, how well they're working, right? If you have two things which are like 4, or two things that are 5 star, like how much granularity do you need, right? So yeah, that's actually a useful point to raise. I'll check with Boris tomorrow, and then presumably at one of the future episodes, I'll share something back. All right.
Well, I think
So
just to finalize the point there, I think it's also perhaps the nature of the metric. So, like with Moore's law, there was a more consistent functional unit to compare it against, whereas this is just energy for a task per se. And I think that's one of the things that we're exploring with, and might be very related to the next topic actually, but it's very much one of the things we're doing with the Sci for AI specification, which is coming through right now, which is like what is the functional unit that is more useful to compare AI models with. And the one for LLMs, the ones everybody landed on is surprise, surprise, token. And so the question I have is more interesting is per token, is it getting more efficient? Because, as we mentioned, I think people are going to use more tokens in the future. And so per token, is it more efficient? I don't know on a aggregate level, I don't have an answer for yes, it's more tokens, therefore more emissions. I don't have a solution for everything in my head right now. All I have a
Well,
solution
that's
for.
okay. It's
Yeah.
coming to the end of the year, and this is just the news show. We don't need to dive into
Okay,
solving
yeah, yeah,
all
yeah,
these
yeah.
problems today.
Yeah, thank
But
you.
you
Oh
did
God.
share a graceful segue to the next story, Asim, which is actually continuing this theme of AI and tokens. I assure you, we're not just going to talk about AI on this podcast. There are some other things we'll be touching on a little bit later. But the next story is about tokens, the SCI for AI, the software carbon intensity for AI, a new standard, and Antarctica, who have just proposed this one token model, which is inspired by some of the work around the software carbon intensity standard. So I'll just take some of the text out of this, where basically this was actually said to me by I think the CEO. He tagged to the two of us on LinkedIn about some of this. And for context, Antarctica is a kind of FinOps slash GreenOps kind of software as a service tool. So it'll give you an idea about what is my kind of cloud estate and where are the hotspots and emissions and what changes might I want to be making there. And I'll just quote some of this and then we'll provide it. This is like a very, very abridged version of some of the stuff. And this was me reading through it and trying to pick out the stuff. So I'm relatively confident there isn't too much in the way of hallucination here. So what they say is software carbon intensity developed under the Linux Foundation by the Green Software Foundation. He's navigating that complicated arrangement. Formalize this beautifully and simple, powerful idea. Express emissions as a rate divided by a functional unit, where they talk about SCI being the operational emissions, as in like the energy used to run something, and the embodied emissions, as in the energy used that's gone into making something, and then do it per R, which is like per functional unit. In this case, like a query or a token or something like that. And to continue the quote, they say that single equation now underpins how sustainability is measured across cloud, web platforms, and enterprise software. What we are now seeing is its natural extension into generative AI. That is the context on which we developed the one token model. So that's what they've been saying there. And they say, and I'll just stop there because that's kind of nice for people to talk up some of the SCI things that I guess you've been talking about for a while. And there's one thing I'll add, and then I'll give you a space to kind of share some hot takes. They said that is the context in which we developed the one token model. Since tokenization differs across providers, OTM introduces a normalization layer called the Antarctica token, which converts provider-specific tokens into a standardized reference unit. So today, OTM uses the output token as its functional unit, but we're continuing to do future work on what input tokens might be. So this looks like one of the first attempts I've seen to create something like a kind of product around this notion of SCI related, SCI framing of this and looking at tokens. And I figure, Asim, as someone who's been very, very involved in the just recently public software carbon intensity of AI, which does explicitly talk about tokens, you might have some reckons. So yeah, fire away.
Yeah. No, I think they've done a really good job actually, very good job of trying to. Oh, we need a lot of rules of thumb. I'm gonna be very honest with you. Like, there's plenty of academic papers, but everybody's confused, and they just need to have like some simplification methodologies, which might not be exact, but they're gonna get us to the next like rung of the ladder. And when we spoke about when the software standards working group agreed on using token and they've only agreed that for LLMs, like other AIs which work in different ways, they'll have different functional units. But for LLMs, which is the main story on the block right now, it's token. And I remember some of the group who are kind of very knowledgeable on the subject, more knowledgeable than me, were like, well, you know, Asim, that one token on Gemini is not equal to one token on OpenAI, which is not equal to one token. Like the literal way they take the text you put in and convert them into this abstract concept called token is different. And so, oh, that's fascinating. That means it actually isn't even even if you look at pricing between these different models, it isn't even comparative. Like, you can't look at, okay, they're 2% less on per token because the actual way they tokenize is different, and your text might generate more tokens on OpenAI than it would on Gemini or something like that. So there's kind of this other vague area. And so I remember when they talked about that, and we're like, that's brilliant. Let's put a pin in that. We need to like cover that at some point, but let's move on through. And what they've done with Antarctica, they said, listen, let's try and normalize to one Antarctica token. And I think what they've got is they basically got a some basically a reference data set, very simple, just a table with some values in it. And they've computed, for instance, that OpenAI is by average 4 characters per token. Anthropic is by average 3.5 characters per token. Mistral is 3.2 characters per token. And therefore, when you're looking at things, you've got to normalize by that ratio to actually meet the same. And that makes a lot of sense. And I suppose, and you're right. They're also one token, also from like a FinOps and a sustainability, because it makes sense. That's one of the reasons why we argued to pick token as well, which was it'd be really strange if you're spending so much effort trying to calculate how much an AI model is going to cost you, and you're thinking in tokens, constantly thinking in tokens to try and figure it out. You've got a context window which is in tokens. We're telling everybody to think in tokens. That if we came out with a carbon per something other than tokens, it would confuse the hell out of everybody, because then they'll be like, well, this costs me less per token. And then this, let's say we picked flop. This is more carbon per flop. I can't compute. I don't know what's better. Maybe the one that costs more emits less carbon. And I can't make that judgment call because I've chosen different denominators under the thing. Whereas if you did get into a situation, I don't know, this is a very contrived example, something is like $2 per million tokens, but 3 kilos per million tokens of carbon, and then how am I going to do this maths right? And then something else is $3 per million tokens, but 1 kilo per carbon. You can then make that judgment. Well, it's more expensive, but it's actually less carbon per token. So just cognitively, it's easier for you to make that judgment. And I think that expresses really what they're trying to do, which is to kind of like make that cognitive judgment easier, not only so you can compare cloud providers better, or different AI providers better, but also so you can do that cost and carbon trade-off in an easy way. And I think that's just now, as I've just vocalized that, I think that's actually, now that I think about it, it's possibly incredibly important, because that's what gives these AI providers enough material to say, hey, we are charging more, but actually our carbon is less. So it kind of connects those dots between the two. That's brilliant. I just thought of that. Yeah, that's a really good connection. You want to help as much as possible. You want to help them to connect cost and carbon. Yeah.
Okay, we'll share a link to that to this paper. It's very, very long, but it has lots of helpful illustrations. And one thing that Asim, I figured you might have a reckon on that I don't really feel like I know enough to really critically engage with this at this moment was not only is this idea of normalizing things to a single token, there's also a part in that paper about saying, well, fundamentally, every single kind of input is essentially being turned into tokens. So if it's like voice, for example, what I'm doing is I'm taking a waveform and then I'm tokenizing that. So you can kind of express voice stuff is in tokens, and they talk about with images saying, well, it might not be using a large language model, but it's using a diffusion model. It's using something similar, but essentially you're still turning things into tokens there as well. So that's one of the arguments they're trying to use to provide a single metric to track, basically, which I hadn't seen someone describe or propose in such a visually clear way before. That was actually, that was one of the kind of big takeaways from me. I was like, okay, yeah, here's a nice way to kind of communicate to other people that you probably can normalize this, or this gives you some idea of one approach for normalizing this to a thing that people are currently given budgets on, or way things are currently used to paying for, because people have kind of got used to paying for tokens in the same way they pay for hours of cloud usage or gigabytes of storage and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I hadn't actually thought about that. Yeah, you're right. That because that's also something that come up in it, and it became quite a lengthy set of conversations in the working group, which was like, for okay, not for text-based LLMs, for other LLMs on other types of things, what is the functional unit we recommend? And the best argument we came up with was if they're selling, you choose the same functional unit to which they're selling the product at. So if you look on their price, if like video, and for video we said it's per second, which is weird. It doesn't really make sense because it depends whether you're doing 4K or HD, but a lot of the providers still charge you per second, and it doesn't really. But it kind of makes sense what they're doing. Yeah, we're very. I'm chatting to this. We're chatting to them next week about collaborating more, maybe seeing if we can bring some of their stuff in
Oh,
because I think
cool.
it's very, very good. And I think they've done the missing piece of a puzzle that we've been looking at for a while. So yeah.
There are two things this makes me think of that I found out since I initially we put this into kind of like the list of things we'll talk about. So first of all, at Green Area yesterday, Ishmael Velasco, he came all the way from Mexico. I think he's still in Mexico, and he was presenting some work. I forget the name of there was an LLM. There was I'll find the name for the project, but the thing that he really presented was basically saying, look, when we're talking about tokens, when you're thinking about you and me as users, we often think in terms of, oh, well, let's say this example I gave before, like tell me a joke, right? That's maybe a single sentence that might be, I don't know, between 10 and 50 tokens, for example. We might be thinking about that in terms of, oh, well, I'm sending 50 tokens and I'm getting maybe a paragraph back, which is maybe 200 tokens back. That we have this idea that, okay, what's happened is that I've sent 50 in one direction, I've got 200 back. And his talk was basically saying, well, that's not the whole truth because when you send something, what a model is actually seeing is both your information, but also a massive system prompt. Unlike say Grok is like 17,000 tokens by itself. So I'm not really sending 20, I'm sending 17,020. And if I'm in a chat going back and forth, then if that's being sent back to me, then I'm not necessarily getting 200 back. Am I getting 17,200 back? There's a whole set of all this other stuff that we can't see right now that he laid out quite a convincing and impressive argument for saying these are all these other parts that we cannot see that aren't really being discussed right now that you kind of do need to be aware is there if you want a full view of this, because that's just like a system prompt. There's also other things like when you're sending something along, if there's maybe like one of the big innovations with say ChatGPT 5 was the idea that there's a router which will then look at your question and then see, is this a really
Oh yeah.
complicated one which needs a really expensive model, or can I use a small model to do this, right? So you've got some other things looking at that, parsing that, making a decision there. So there's all this other processing that isn't visible to us that honestly, he didn't propose any specific solutions to this, although there's a kind of cool repo that to kind of help people engage with this idea. But it was really, really thought-provoking. I think that's the first time I've seen people propose this, because a lot of the time we're now arriving on this idea of, okay, let's just start counting tokens. And if we're going to count tokens, then, well, we kind of need to count all the tokens, right? But that's really hard for us to see a lot of the time.
Yeah, there's a burgeoning group of people that run around and try and hack the system prompts out of LLMs, and there's like repos you can go to where they've got like Gemini system prompt, and you kind of got to convince the LLM to leak it to you. And Grok actually famously puts its system, always they publish their system prompt on GitHub, which is how we figured out what happened in the whole Mecha Hitler thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So
For
it's
those,
fascinating. Yeah,
yeah. We'll share a link to Mecha Hitler rather than go to the whole
yeah, yeah.
ignominious episode there. The other thing that I want to share with you that I think is actually really, really thought-provoking that I didn't know about was even possible was our friend Scott Chamberlain at NeuralWatt. He basically said, hey, Chris, we've been building a system and we want to try a new idea. We're trying to test the market to see if people are interested in this. He says, well, what if we just sold access to sold inference by the kilowatt hour? So he said, like, I'm not even going to try and count the tokens. I mean, you can see them and everything. And like, he's going to say, well, you could just pay by the kilowatt hour for inference. And then it may be the idea that you can trust them to choose the right model, or that you can set the models yourself. But he's like experimenting with this idea. And like, this feels really disruptive because the idea of sharing information, this is sharing like actual energy consumption. Mistral doesn't use this. Sam Altman shared a single tweet about this. It's the thing that everyone guards so jealously. And he's just come out and said, let's just price it and make it available and then just prove that it's possible. That feels like a really exciting idea. We'll share a link to the survey if this is interesting to you, because personally, I think this is a really cool idea, and it seems to address a bunch of these issues around, well, if you're not going to share your entire information architecture, you can at least just be clear about how much energy you're using, because ultimately, that's what we're looking at here. That's what we have to convert to carbon a lot of the time.
And that seems to be the biggest blocker from a
Yeah.
financial perspective as well. So I think we need interesting ideas here. I think we need kind of new, unique ways of looking at this problem because, it's the current one is doesn't help us.
Yeah, and I suppose this brings us to the next story about the fact that you might need to know some of this even after we've seen all these changes in the law in Europe. So this was a story from ESG Today, but also from some other kind of much more specialized discussions around this. So in Europe, there is a law called the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And what they have is they have a bunch of standards saying, as an entity above a certain size, you need to at least disclose all this information here. All right, and they are two things. We've actually had this whole shift in the kind of like the legal landscape, which is basically saying there's too much of this. We need to simplify all of it. And like as someone working in a non-profit who is very in favor of transparency like this, we're not sure that this whole simplification and competitiveness angle is really good faith argumentation here. But what we've seen is that we've seen these reporting standards kind of pared back to remove like maybe 2/3 of them, and you've seen the law, but it currently looks like it might end up going from, rather than there being 50,000 companies in Europe that need to report and share standardized, useful, comparable data, to just 5,000 companies. I think last week the actual new standards were shared, and amazingly, even after people have taken chainsaws to all these laws, there is still a requirement to disclose GHG emissions for purchased cloud computing and data center services inside it still. So yeah, like the disclosure requirement E18 blah blah. But yeah, they explicitly call it out. So somehow that has made it through. I didn't think that was going to happen, and like I figured, I was amazed. This is I thought this was going to get chainsawed to death. Basically, to see this come through was like, wow.
And do you think part of it is because AI is so prevalent in their minds, they felt that they couldn't cut that one,
It might be,
Yeah.
because we do have this, like when you've got the European, like I'm speaking as someone calling from Paris, who in a company which is we're in a Dutch organization, but I live in Germany, so like I can't escape this, right? And we have all these plans to like triple data center capacity for this, and we don't have that much in the way of information about, okay, well, what are the implications of all this data center build out? Because even though we have some laws right now, we've not got 100% following of the law, right? So we've seen in Germany, for example, we now have an idea, like we've seen independent research, which is probably estimating that in Germany right now, you're looking at between 20 and 22 terawatt hours of energy consumption each year from the data center sector, right? But we've had this law, the energy efficiency law, and you've had like 70% of the companies report, but it's something in the region of 5 terawatt hours. So you've got 3/4 of the reporting of the energy that's supposed to be there, not there, but you've got a small number of very large companies who are not reporting, basically. Because if most of the companies in the country have reported, but we're missing most of the energy, that kind of implies that the companies that haven't reported are the drivers of most of the other energy, basically.
But isn't that so? You're talking about the triple
The EED, the Energy Efficiency
energy
Directive. It has a
directive,
different name in
which
different countries, but yeah, that's
yeah,
basically it.
but wasn't that? I mean, I think you're describing something illegal, aren't you? So like it was if you are a company at least of a certain size, you had to report. So if the largest three quarters of the energy consumption is not reporting, that's indicating to me that the big players are choosing to ignore the EED, right? Or is that
That
or
is
because
one.
the only other thing it could be that the big players are reporting, but it's the long tail that are consuming, and they didn't have to report. Like, what do you
Yeah,
think? Yeah,
I'll share the links to what we. I'll share a link to the blog post where I kind of discovered this the other day, and I'll also share links to the study from the German Ministry of it's climate and economy because they've
right,
changed it from to economy and energy now
right.
with the new government, which has this kind of divergence. But we've seen the same pattern in the Netherlands as well, where with the Netherlands you see a massive gap between this, and yeah, there is a question like, well, where is all this missing energy
Energy.
consumption if it's not coming from the more than half of the providers who are sharing this stuff, right? It's an open question, and we have. I mean, we're talking about law here, but one other thing we're seeing is that this is the first year of the CSRD that's happened, right? And we are basically learning how seriously companies are taking this. So I haven't seen the information yet, but I know that Microsoft had their annual general meeting last week, right? So as a company that is active and working in Europe, I would expect them to be sharing all this information about that's inside these standards, like from the CSRD. And there's like really juicy stuff inside there. I seen one of them is like, how much revenue have you received from the oil and gas sector? So if there's a whole discussion about we're sponsors of COP27, COP29, COP30, then knowing how much the oil and gas sector is paying for the use of AI for extraction of oil and gas is probably that feels like a policy relevant piece of information. We'll find out if that's out there. But this is an idea of why we have some of these laws to kind of have an informed discussion. But we don't know if I haven't seen that yet, and we'll learn if it's being enforced or not. Because yeah, sometimes companies end up being this big that well, the people who are legislating this might not be in a mad hurry to enforce this, and it's a bit of a problem, to put it mildly.
Do you know just because you've read it into it, and I was wondering if this made its way through the chainsawing, and it's kind of separate to what you just described, but like the CSRD did have a provision in it originally, which was it was your what was it? It was your responsibility to work with your suppliers to ensure that they um I've forgotten what it was, but either had to have like a net zero plan, or they had to
Oh
work towards
yeah.
decarbonization, and you were liable for your suppliers not doing that, and you even had to like fund them if they said to you, "Listen, we can't do it. You need to give us more money." You had to give them more money, and if they still didn't do it, you had to drop them as suppliers. So you literally there was like this incredible, which I thought was the most interesting and teethy part of the whole thing, because you had to like you couldn't just say, "Oh, my suppliers. Oh, what a bunch of. Ugh, I've tried chatting to them. They won't do it." You couldn't do that anymore. You're like, no, you have to work with your suppliers or drop them. Do you
So
know if that
this
made its way through?
this is actually a slightly different law.
Oh, okay. I'm
So the
getting
way this
confused.
works is that you can think of
I might get.
CSRD for
Yeah,
transparency. That's your showing your progress.
yeah.
What I think you're referring to is
It's
another
CS.
law
Yeah,
called
it's good.
the CS Triple D, which
Triple
is
D. Yeah, yeah,
the
yeah.
Corporate Supply Chain Due Diligence
Diligence.
Directive. It's
Yeah,
something
yeah,
really,
yeah,
really
yeah, yeah,
detailed.
yeah, yeah,
That was honestly the really, really big one that really drives all this action because that says you have to have a plan. And the CSRD is you have to report progress against this plan every single year, with the idea being that, okay, if a massive block, like say the European Union has said, we need to be carbon neutral by 2045 or some figure like that, and that's legally binding, then if companies are one of the masses, some of the most powerful actors, you need to have some mechanism to say, well, this is what society has said we need to do. If you're going to be part of society, like corporations being part of society, then you need to demonstrate that you're actually aligned with the same goals we have. Otherwise, there's a problem. That is the law which I think has I think that was the one that has been under significant attack, and we currently have the situation. I think we're learning that it's referred to as the omnibus, where basically people are doing everything they can to, well, a number of large companies are doing everything they can to basically get these laws nullified or taken out. And I'll share a link to a really good piece by SOMO, which is a Dutch entity that's been looking about, okay, who's really driving this and where are these suggestions coming from?
Who's really driving
surprise, surprise, yeah, the fossil fuel industry are all over this, basically. So we'll add some links to that to make that a bit clearer. But yeah, this gives you an idea. So we have all these ideas saying on paper you should be this transparent, but whether we're going to see things happen is another matter. And if that doesn't happen, then you've got to ask, well, what are the courses for remedy that we might actually have, for example? Let's move instead to our final story. This is a case where, okay, there's a rift. Sometimes you do have companies work. I guess companies are not, but they're not entirely monolithic, for example. And this is a really good story that kind of demonstrates this. This is a story from the Financial Times. Climate rift opens between Amazon and rivals in row over data center power. So this one here is a story from the Financial Times about the difference between Google and Microsoft, who are currently arguing for 24/7 power, like a much more like rigorous way of marking energy used as green. And then you've got another camp, which is primarily led by both Meta and Amazon, arguing for what they refer to as emissionality, this idea of marginal emissions. So it's much cheaper. It's much cheaper to implement because it's nowhere near as strict. And you have both camps involved in this. And what we now have is that we've seen, you see like a clean energy buyers group called Resource being the kind of place where this fight is taking place. And this story talks about, it provides an introduction, but it also really specifically refers to Amazon saying, okay, we're not sure why we should be funding this big energy buyers group if you're not in favor of this. So you have a thing where, okay, if you don't have the law taking place, it may be that you have other very, very powerful entities trying to kind of shape these laws. And this one is really interesting because it kind of shows, in my view, where this discussion is taking place. And it shows that, like, yeah, there are other, I guess, arenas than just the legal environment, than like, say, the law we have over here, for example, with the CSRD and all the things ending in D. And there's other places where you see these fights playing out. And you have people with different drivers for this, I suppose, as well.
Mm. So let me just understand, because I think just to explain emissionality versus and I'll tell you how I think of it, and you tell me if I'm wrong. So if you're on a grid and you're saying you're buying some renewable energy to, let's say, offset your energy consumption, should that energy be brought on the grid that you're on, or can it be basically anywhere in the world? And the argument for emissionality is that, listen, it kind of like, if you're in like even in the UK, I suppose, like, it doesn't, one more wind farm in the UK is not really going to drive massive, is not as good as one more wind farm in India. And so therefore you should always pick the location in the world to put the renewable which has the most bang, as in the most ability to displace coal. To me, that argument makes a lot of sense. But I can imagine there's other ways that actually can be manipulated to actually not have that headline benefit, or has like another kind of like nefarious benefit, which I'm not.
No, you've exactly caught it. This is precisely where the fight comes down. So one group is basically saying, okay, we want decarbonized green energy to actually mean decarbonized green energy. And some context, which is not all that well known, is that, okay, renewable energy has become one of the cheapest forms of new power. Now, like most new energy that's coming onto the grid is coming from clean sources, like almost overwhelmingly solar and wind right now, although there are other things that are coming onto the mix as well, right? So yes, you're right. In one level, if you would just say, well, what we just need at a global level is just more of this stuff, right? Then you could say, well, why am I trying to put it in the UK versus putting it in India? Like, because if India has a really, really kind of coal heavy grid, then yes, then you can make the argument that okay, that might be more effective there. However, one of the issues that you have, and the kind of counter argument people tend to use, is that no, this stuff really needs to mean something, and we know that it's not that. As you get closer to like entirely decarbonizing a grid, the cost of doing so climbs. So it's really, really cheap. It's maybe 30 to 40 euros a megawatt hour or dollars a megawatt hour further down when you're just introducing new power. But as you come towards the edge, you need to start doing things like buying batteries or buying all these other kind of forms of storage, which do push up the cost, right? And the kind of climate justice argument, or the justice argument people basically make, is that what you're doing when you do this is you are essentially using up all of the kind of cheap decarbonization stuff. So there's only expensive things left. So if you're Meta, or if you're like you're Meta, and you say, well, I'm just going to buy all the cheap stuff in India, leaving people in India to have to when they have to do this, they have to pay for the really, really expensive stuff. That there's a kind of justice argument there. And there's an argument saying that like what we really need right now is people spending on the expensive stuff, because that's what we've seen bring it down the kind of cost curve, so that it becomes more competitive and more easy to kind of roll out in other places. So like we spoke about India, for example, like India, like solar and batteries are now cost competitive with coal for a significant chunk of the grid. So you're seeing that transition kind of already take place here. But one of the reasons you've had that is because in rich countries, you've had loads of money spent on increasing the amount of deployment of, say, solar and, to a degree, batteries all around the world. So that has brought down this cost. So there is another argument saying, well, this should mean much because there's a spillover effects, and also these things should mean stuff, because for most people, when they think they're using green energy, they think they're really getting green energy, right? And like, yeah, so I can kind of see why. I understand the argument that's coming from, say, Amazon and Meta here, but I think the merits of of course we're biased. We're an organization talking about fossil-free internet. We're going to have a certain perspective. But this feels like one where I think the argument's being put forward by Meta but being put forward by Microsoft and Google, who are, let's talk about, these are the richest companies in the world. Like the 7 organizations here are half of the US stock market, right? They're the people with the funding to kind of make these changes. So I feel like, yeah, if I was in a camp here, I would be in a camp on the 24/7 group here, because that feels like that's aligning
the non-emissionality.
Exactly. That's aligning the people with the power with the responsibilities to do it, rather than pushing it onto people who honestly don't have the same responsibility and don't have the same access to the funding, really.
I'll just add one other point to this, and I don't particularly I'm indifferent, I suppose, to both of those. I think there's arguments on both sides, and I don't feel I have the experience to really give a good opinion here. But I just think this is a good insight. I remember when I was at Intel. Intel's a chip manufacturer, fab. And the biggest competitor at the time is very different now, because the whole competitive landscape has changed. But the biggest competitor at the time is TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation. And Intel had a far better ability to make environmental claims. Why? Because a lot of their fabs were based in countries and where there was just literally more renewables on the grid. So therefore, fabs, the chips, one of the biggest sources of carbon emissions for chips is the electricity it takes to generate them, which is massive. Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation is mostly in Taiwan, and Taiwan doesn't really have a lot of options for anything else. So they just were forced to have a lot of fossil power. So it became and I'm not sure how they're engaging in this conversation, but I just want to point out that it is actually, if it was like 5 years ago, like Intel would be advocating for stay on the grid for no other reason than that forces that allows them to keep their advantage and forces their competitor to not, even though Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Corporation might be willing to deploy billions of dollars around the world. This is an invented scenario. I have no idea what the actual politics of these organizations is, but I'm just pointing out that there are, at that level, the strategies that are being employed, there are different strategies being employed, and it might not be people's positions on topics might not be because they think it's the best for the planet, just because they think that it will give them a competitive advantage versus their competitor for whatever situation that they're in right now.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think companies, I mean, any entity is kind of incentivized to work in its own interests, right? And this is something we actually had to navigate because, so as part of my work in the policy working group, we actually had to. We saw this. There's a ongoing consultation related to this kind of big bun fight about how you count energy as green, and we ended up. We've got people in the Green Software Foundation on both camps. Like I might have a personal opinion, but along this, but I'm also I can't just say this is my opinion here. So we had to get a synthesis of people coming along and looking at this, and you can actually see our response to this, and you can see the discussion that we have in the public domain on kind of the GitHub issues, where I'll add some links to that. But the thing it's worth sharing is that this is an open discussion right now, because the entity that basically pretty much every single law and every single reporting standard kind of refers to, the GHG protocol, they have an open consultation right now for any entity or any organization or individual to respond, to chime in and say, no, this is what I think how I think this stuff should work. It was going to run until the 19th, but it's now been extended to the 31st. So if you have opinions on this, you don't need to hustle before in the next 9 days or however long you have when this comes out. You've now got a month to respond, but please do respond, because this one change here will cascade through all these other changes. Because if this kind of was sorted out in the first place back in 2015, I'm not sure the Green Software Foundation, or I think it would have totally changed how the software carbon intensity would have even been designed or any of that stuff, right? Because you had to look at this and say the current rules don't make sense right now, so we shouldn't. So we're going to not recognize this whole market-based thing, because a market-based thing is distortive and doesn't actually represent what's happening, or what doesn't really represent the physical reality, which is why you need to have all these things in the first place. So yeah, there's something. There is still space to move and respond on this one.
Standards seem boring. They're hard, but like one sentence change can, as I said, can move billions and billions, if not $1 trillion over many years into different directions. So that's why these battles are happening on kind of one line changes.
Yeah, and this is why I'm grateful that there is a standards organization that lets us have some of these conversations and has the stuff free and open for people to use. Like you can download the software carbon intensity, or you can pay 62 Swiss francs for the exact same information from the ISO website if you really want, because that's what you have to pay for lots of other standards if you want to actually interrogate and understand what's going on. All right. I think that takes us to our time, but really lovely catching up with you. And I guess I won't see you for the rest of the year, and I'm guessing people won't hear either of our voices on the podcast before the rest of the year. So I guess Happy New Year to everyone, and all the rest.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you. Have a good trip. I know you got a vacation coming up. Have a good vacation.
I will very much enjoy my vacation. Definitely, vacation, not vocation. Yeah.
Vacation, not vocation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Take care of yourself, Asim. Have a lovely winter break. All right. Take care, mate.
You too. Bye.
Okay, bye. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Just a reminder to follow Environment Variables on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. And please do leave a rating and review if you like what we're doing. It helps other people discover the show. And of course, we'd love to have more listeners. To find out more about the Green Software Foundation, please visit greensoftware.foundation. That's greensoftware.foundation in any browser. Thanks again, and see you in the next episode.